Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Now, before I begin, tell me where you are watching from. I'd love to know which cities and towns are joining me for this memory that stayed with me for years. It was one of those quiet evenings where the house felt heavier than usual. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen was the only sound breaking through the silence. I had just made myself a cup of tea, the steam curling up like a soft ribbon into the dim lamplight, when the phone rang. My nephew's name lit up the screen. At first, I thought it was just one of his casual calls, the kind that lasted a few minutes, him asking how I was, me reminding him to eat well, and then both of us laughing at something small. But the tone in his voice that evening told me this wasn't going to be an ordinary conversation. "Hi, Auntie," he said softly, almost hesitant. His words carried a weight I couldn't quite place. I sat down slowly in the armchair by the window, looking out at the dark street, the branches swaying gently in the autumn breeze. I knew right away this call wasn't about something simple. There was a pause, one long enough for me to hear the faint sounds of traffic from his end. I pictured him sitting in his car, or maybe pacing around his apartment, phone pressed tightly to his ear. He had always been the cheerful one, the kind of boy who tried to keep worries hidden behind a smile. But that night, there was no smile in his tone. I said gently, "You sound different tonight. What's on your mind?" Another pause. Then he sighed, the kind of sigh that comes when someone has been holding in more than they should. "I didn't know who else to call," he admitted. His voice cracked slightly, and in that moment, my heart tightened. I leaned back into the chair, my tea forgotten on the side table. The night outside suddenly seemed to grow still, as though even the wind was waiting to hear what he had to say. "You did the right thing calling me," I told him, keeping my voice steady. "I'm here." The words started to come slowly at first, as though he was testing whether he could trust the silence between us. He spoke about feeling overwhelmed, about the pressure of choices that seemed too heavy for someone his age, about disappointments he hadn't shared with anyone else, not even his friends. I could hear the vulnerability in his words, the honesty that only appears when someone finally decides to let go of the mask they've been wearing. As he spoke, I found myself remembering the little boy he once was, the one who would run through my kitchen with scraped knees, asking for cookies. That memory wrapped itself around the present moment, reminding me that no matter how old he was now, part of him would always need reassurance, just as he had back then. I didn't interrupt him. I let him talk. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give is not advice, but the space to be heard. The sound of his voice filled the room, rising and falling, and with each confession, I felt the years between us narrow into something closer, something tender. When he finally fell quiet, I realized I was gripping the armrest of my chair, as though holding myself steady. I took a deep breath, steadying my own emotions, and said, "You're not alone in this. You don't have to carry it all by yourself." I could almost hear the relief in his silence, as though those words had lifted something off his chest. The clock on the wall ticked softly in the background, but neither of us rushed to end the call. That evening, in the simple act of answering the phone, I discovered more about him than I had ever expected. And in listening, I discovered something about myself too. That sometimes love isn't about solving someone's problems, but about letting them know you'll be there, no matter what. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, though I hadn't slept much at all. My mind kept replaying my nephew's words from the night before. I made my way into the kitchen, the smell of coffee filling the air as I tried to ground myself in the small comforts of routine. But every sip of coffee seemed to carry the weight of his voice, that trembling edge when he confessed how lost he felt. I found myself looking at the phone on the table more than once, almost expecting it to ring again, I thought about calling him, but I didn't want to press. Sometimes when someone shares something heavy, they need space to breathe afterward. So instead, I decided to write down my thoughts, things I wished I could say in the moment, reminders of strength, little lessons from my own life that might help him see the bigger picture. It gave me a sense of purpose, as though preparing for the next time he would reach out. By the afternoon, he did call. The sound of his name lighting up my screen again made my heart leap, but this time his voice was steadier. He apologized for pouring so much out the night before, as if honesty needed an apology. I told him softly, "Never apologize for sharing your truth. It's better than keeping it all inside." He laughed a little, almost sheepishly, and said, "It's just, I didn't want to seem weak." Those words cut into me. Weakness. How often we confuse being honest about our struggles with weakness. I told him, "Do you know what's truly weak? Pretending you're fine while you're falling apart inside. What you did last night, that took courage." There was a pause, and then he said, "I guess I never thought of it that way." I could hear something shift in him, as though a tiny light had been lit where there was only darkness. We spoke for nearly an hour, and during that time, he let me into corners of his life I hadn't known about. He talked about how work had been draining him, about expectations from people who didn't understand how hard he was trying. He admitted he had been keeping his feelings bottled up because he didn't want to disappoint the family. Hearing him say that made me ache, because I knew that burden all too well. I shared with him stories from when I was his age, times when I had stumbled, failed, or felt that same crushing weight of not living up to what others expected of me. I told him about the mistakes I had made, but also how each one became a lesson that shaped me into the woman I am today. He listened quietly, and when I finished, he said, "I never knew you went through all that." It struck me then how often we shield younger ones from our past struggles, thinking it protects them. But maybe what they need most is to know we've been there too, that we understand not from the outside, but from lived experience. As the daylight faded, I could hear his tone shift again, lighter this time, almost hopeful. He said, "Talking to you makes me feel like I'm not crazy, like maybe I can handle this." "You can handle this," I replied firmly, "and you're not alone." When the call ended, I sat for a long while staring at the soft glow of the lamp, realizing how much had changed between us in just 2 evenings. We weren't just aunt and nephew anymore. We had become confidants, bound by truths shared in quiet hours. I knew this was just the beginning. Something told me that the days ahead would reveal even more than I expected. The days that followed seemed to carry a different rhythm. Every evening, just as the sky dimmed into shades of blue and orange, I found myself wondering if he would call again. And more often than not, he did. Those calls became part of my days, as natural as making dinner or turning down the lights before bed. One evening, the rain tapped gently against the window panes, filling the room with a steady rhythm. I sat curled in my chair with a blanket draped over my lap when his call came through. His voice, though calmer now, carried something new, uncertainty mixed with determination. "Auntie," he said, "I've been thinking about what you told me, about how you went through your own struggles. How did you really make it through?" The question lingered in the air, heavier than any before. I let the silence sit for a moment while the rain kept playing its psalm on the glass. Then I answered him honestly. "I didn't always make it through gracefully," I admitted. "There were times I felt like I was breaking apart. But what saved me was learning to lean on the people who cared for me, instead of trying to carry it all alone. And slowly, I realized the hardest storms don't last forever. They never do." He was quiet for a long time after that. I could almost picture him sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor, letting the words settle. Then he said softly, "It's hard for me to lean on people. I've always felt like I should be the strong one." That confession touched me deeply. I told him, strength isn't about holding everything in. It's about knowing when to let someone help you carry the load. If you close yourself off, you'll only make the journey lonelier. The rain grew heavier outside, and in that moment, the world around me felt wrapped in the intimacy of our conversation. He began to share more openly than ever before, about fears he had never voiced, about how he felt like he was failing in ways nobody could see. Each word he spoke carried a weight, but also a release, as if letting it out made it easier to bear. I listened, my heart steady, offering him the kind of silence that doesn't demand an answer, but welcomes truth. When I finally spoke again, I said, "You know, you don't have to have all the answers right now. Life doesn't give us a map. It gives us steps, one at a time. And taking those steps, even when you're unsure, is what leads you forward." There was a small laugh on the other end of the line, almost like a breath of relief. "You always know what to say," he murmured. "Sometimes I think you understand me better than I understand myself." That remark stayed with me long after the call ended. It wasn't that I had all the answers. I certainly didn't. But what I did have was the willingness to listen, and maybe that was what he needed most. As the evening wore on, I found myself reflecting on my own younger years once more, how desperately I had wished someone had told me the same things. Perhaps that was why his calls meant so much to me. They were not only about guiding him, but about healing the echoes of my own past. That night, as the rain softened into a gentle drizzle, I realized this journey we had begun together was no longer just about him finding his way. It was about both of us discovering something unexpected, the power of connection when life feels unbearably heavy. A few weeks had passed since that first call, and by now, our conversations had grown into a rhythm neither of us wanted to break. Every time the phone rang, I felt a mixture of anticipation and tenderness, knowing that another piece of his heart would unfold, and perhaps another part of mine would quietly heal in return. It was on a Sunday evening when the most revealing call came. I had just finished tidying up the kitchen after dinner. The house was still, filled with the faint scent of roasted vegetables and the lingering warmth of the oven. As I settled into my chair with a blanket, the phone buzzed. His name appeared on the screen, and I answered with the kind of calm familiarity that only comes after many long talks. This time, though, there was no hesitation in his voice. "Auntie," he said, "I've made a decision." The steadiness in his tone was new, almost proud. I felt my chest tighten as I waited for him to continue. He spoke about taking steps he had been afraid of before, small changes, but important ones. He had reached out to a mentor at work for guidance. He had opened up to a close friend instead of pretending everything was fine. And perhaps most moving of all, he had started writing his thoughts down at night, turning the weight in his chest into words on paper. "It's helping me breathe easier," he admitted. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the relief wash over me. "I'm so proud of you," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "You're braver than you realize." There was a pause, and then he said something I'll never forget. "I wouldn't have done any of it if you hadn't picked up that call. You reminded me I wasn't alone when I felt like no one could understand." Those words pierced straight through me, not with pain, but with a kind of quiet joy that comes when you realize your presence has truly mattered in someone's life. My eyes stung with unshed tears, but I kept my voice steady. "You've always had the strength in you. All I did was remind you it was there." The silence that followed wasn't heavy like before. It was warm, filled with trust. It felt like the kind of silence two souls share when they no longer need to fill the space with words to know they are connected. That night, after we said our goodbyes, I sat for a long time in the quiet of my living room, reflecting on everything these weeks had brought. His first trembling call, the nights of uncertainty, the rain-soaked confessions, and now this, his decision to move forward with courage. I realized then that life has a way of surprising us. Sometimes the people we think need us the most end up giving us something back, reminders of resilience, of connection, of what it means to truly listen and be heard. My nephew's call in the evening revealed more than I ever expected. It revealed his struggles, yes, but also his courage. It revealed my role not just as his aunt, but as his confidant. And most of all, it revealed the enduring truth that in our moments of greatest vulnerability, when we reach out in honesty, we often find the strength we never knew we had. And that memory, carried in the simple ring of a phone on a quiet night, will stay with me for the rest of my life.